G'day, it's Mark and welcome back to the channel. And as part of our automotive history series, where we've already covered the Ford Falcon from the XK right through to the final FGX, we're now going to commence a new series on the Chrysler Valiant, starting off with the R series. The first Valiant produced by Chrysler Australia was known as the R series or the RV1, and it was produced from January 1962 to March 1962. The cars were produced from completely knocked down packs or CKD kits that were imported from Windsor in Canada, and the bodies were painted at Chrysler Australia's Mile End facility with final assembly undertaken at Tonsley Park. The Australian model comprised a combination of US Valiant V100 base model and V200 deluxe model components. The car was produced in two models, the Valiant RV1-2 manual sedan and the Valiant RV1-4 automatic sedan. The RV1 was offered only in a four-door sedan form, and it was marketed by Chrysler Australia as the Valiant by Chrysler, rather than the Chrysler Valiant. The R-Series Valiant was offered only with a 225 cubic inch or 3.7 litre inline six-cylinder engine, the Slant 6, and that had a choice of 3-speed manual transmission or the optional 3-speed torque flight automatic transmission. The engine was called the Slant 6, and this was due to it being inclined to the right at an angle of 30 degrees. And this was to allow for a lower bonnet line or hood line, and also allow for the long intake manifold arms which were used as a major feature of the engine. The manual transmission was a 3-speed floor shift, unlike most manuals of the time in the Big Three, or what was now to become the Big Three with Holden and Ford, that offered manual transmissions on the column. So a manual floor shift was seen as certainly a big advantage and a more sporty approach. And it had a curved style gear stick that wrapped around the edges of the bench seat and sat next to the driver's leg. And it wasn't until the introduction of the following model, the S series, that the shifter moved to the steering column. The automatic transmission, the Chrysler Torque Flight, was regarded as one of the best transmissions available in the world at the time. It had an excellent reputation for service and smoothness. Gears were selected via push buttons, which sat to the edge of the car's dash gauges. Dimensions of the car were length 4,666 millimetres or 183.7 inches, width 1,788 millimetres or 70.4 inches, wheelbase 2,705 millimetres or 106.5 inches, and a height of 1,397 millimetres or 55 inches, which was quite low for the time. It's fair to say that at the time, the Valiant was groundbreaking when compared to the equivalent Holden or Falcon. While the Falcon offered very avant-garde styling, there were issues around its durability, but the Valiant R-Series really took the market by storm. The R-Series Valiant raised the standard across the board for Australian family cars, and it was probably the most impactful vehicle since the launch of the 48215 Holden in 1948. While the Falcon XK and upcoming XL models certainly represented a contemporary styling appearance, the Valiant was almost a car from another planet. Virgil Exner, the head of Chrysler Styling Studios, had delivered a car which had very avant-garde styling, and it really created a storm both in the US and in Australia. And certainly compared to the EK Holden, which still had another 6 months to run at the launch of the R-Series Valiant, it was completely outgunned in all respects. But Australians had barely a chance to take advantage of this amazing new car because the production of the vehicle was extremely low. And only 3 months after its launch, the S-Series model was debuted. With fins front and rear and a fake spare wheel design on the rear deck lid or boot, the car certainly cut a very unusual, almost space-age appearance on the Australian market. While the car had been launched in the United States in 1960, Australian styling tastes and themes were generally quite a few years behind US trends. So despite the fact that the car was then a 2-year-old design, it still represented almost a space-age appearance to the average Australian. While they were in different price classes, the R-Series Valiant replaced the Chrysler Royal, which had been a warmed-over version or an Australian update of the 1953 Plymouth. The R-Series Valiant featured unitised body construction with rugged torque boxes that were integral to the structure, and it was a generation ahead of the Falcon. And it was linked by 5 cross members with almost every body part adding to torsional strength. And this included things like the inner guards, the radiator support, the front shock towers, and the upper edges of the bolt-on guards. There were over 5,000 spot welds, which resulted in an extremely strong and lightweight body structure. In fact, when compared to the full chassis 1959 Plymouth, the R-Series Valiant delivered a torsional strength that was 95% stiffer and 50% stronger in the beam. As I mentioned earlier, the car was designed by the head of Chrysler styling, Virgil Exner, and the influence of this design was certainly taken from some of his work that he'd done with Ghia in Italy. The car featured a sleek, low waistline in a compact family car, while still providing more than adequate room for families. The car also featured a low, flat roof line that was supported by 8 thin but strong pillars that framed an extra side window. And this moved the roof strengthening ribs to the outside. Another bonus was the movement of the front and rear windscreen pillars out of the driver's field of vision, and using glass that curved around the sides to meet them. So this clever pillar and glass design generated almost 306 degrees of field of vision, and it provided a remarkable visibility for the drivers and passengers alike. The sloping rear glass also tapered into the boot lid, which allowed for increased boot capacity and a more streamlined design. Probably the only downside of this design was because of its quite unique styling themes with the front and rear themes. It was a car that would also date as vehicles became more cleanly styled in the early 1960s. And this was probably reflected somewhat by the fact that the Falcon in the United States had taken a more conventional pathway in terms of styling, albeit very contemporary and modern. In the United States, when the Valiant was launched, it sold 194,292 units, compared to the Falcon, which sold 435,676 units. By 1961 in the US, Valiant sales had dropped to 143,078, while Falcon sales increased to 474,000. The Valiant also introduced a deep dish steering wheel, similar to that was offered on the Ford Falcon, safety door locks, seat cushion retainers, built-in seatbelt anchorage points, a double-jointed rear-view mirror, fully boxed roof headers and rail supports, and the straight-line pillars provided unprecedented rollover protection, and an inboard fuel tank which also provided improved rear collision protection. As well, the flatter dashboard with padding also was located further away than occupants as usual, reducing the risk of head injury. Other standard features included dual headlights, reversing lights, twin horns, twin sun visors with a passenger mirror, armrests on all doors, dash-mounted interior light switches, and an alternator instead of a generator, and this was 3 years ahead of Holden. As well as this, and in true Chrysler tradition, a full set of instruments were also provided, which included fuel, water temperature, and ammeter gauges. Australian cars were also fitted with larger 14-inch wheels, which was certainly seen as a benefit for our road conditions. And the push-button automatic transmission was certainly seen as a real novelty, and it added to that space-age theme. And probably a few Australians would have been aware, but it probably recalled in some people's minds the teletouch system that was used on the Edsel from 1958. I mentioned the fact that the Valiants also had the alternator instead of a generator, And for those that aren't aware, the alternator provides charging for the battery while the vehicle's moving, also while it's just idling away, as opposed to a generator which tends to just charge the vehicle while it's in motion. So it's seen as a far superior form of charging, and it's what's fitted to all cars today. The push-button automatic on the Chrysler Valiant was only 49 kilograms in weight, and it also allowed for a lower centre of gravity with a lower transmission tunnel. And it was a 3-speed as opposed to many automatic transmissions at the time, including the Holden and the Ford, which only offered a 2-speed. The cars also featured Chrysler's famous torsion bar double wishbone front suspension. At the rear, there were leaf spring suspension, and this was located behind the rear axle, and it played a major part in terms of improving acceleration, squat, brake dip, and also body roll. The 225 cubic inch slant 6 engine in the R-Series Valiant provided 145 horsepower, and this was an amazing output when compared to Holden and Ford. Holden only provided its engine with 75 horsepower, while the Falcon offered 85 horsepower. So the Valiant significantly outgunned them and was the new benchmark in terms of performance. While in the US, there were 4-door sedans, 2-door coupes, and even station wagons. In Australia, we just simply got the 4-door sedan. The cars also featured in Australian Motorsport and provided very good performance, although eventually were outgunned by the V8 Studebakers and eventually the Ford Mustangs. Racing drivers, though, like Ern Abbott with his R-Series Valiant, went up against vehicles like Bob Jane's Jaguar Mark II and even the Ford Galaxy. Often the Valiant would break away from the rest of the pack along with the Jaguar, but its Achilles heel were the drum brakes, and generally in the closing stages of many of the races, the brakes started to fade. There was no doubt, though, that the 225 cubic inch 6 was open to plenty of modifications through the carburetor system and exhaust, providing really strong performance. And cars like that of Clem Smith could accelerate to 70 miles an hour in second gear. But getting back to the road cars, it's often said that car styling is a little bit like lemonade. You might have something that's very sparkly and bubbly, but it soon goes flat. And this really applied, I think, from a styling point of view to the Valiant. It had a very avant-garde space-age style, but it did date quite quickly. Today, though, they're a tremendous-looking car that really stands out from everything else on the road. Total production of the R-Series Valiant was 672 manuals and 336 automatics for a total of 1,008. So no wonder they sold out so quickly, and within 3 months were replaced by the S-Series. But that's for another episode. Well, I hope you enjoyed that episode on the R-Series Valiant. Make sure you stay tuned, keep subscribed, and check out the upcoming episodes on the S right through to the final CM Valiant. So hit that subscribe button. Please give the episode a thumbs up, and we'll see you next time. Thanks very much for watching. Bye.